The morning sun filtered through our kitchen window in suburban Phoenix, casting long shadows across the granite countertops that David had insisted we install last year. I stood at the sink, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the edge, waiting for another wave of dizziness to pass. The headaches had been getting worse for months now, accompanied by the strange ringing in my left ear that made me feel like I was living underwater. "You're doing it again, Rebecca," David said from behind his newspaper, not bothering to look up. His voice carried that familiar tone of irritation that had become as regular as our morning coffee routine. "Doing what?" I asked, though I already knew what he meant. The dramatic sighing, the holding on to things like you're about to collapse. "We've been over this." He folded the paper with a sharp snap and finally looked at me. At 42, David still had the same confident smile that had attracted me 15 years ago, but lately it felt more condescending than charming. "Dr. Patterson said your blood work was fine. Your blood pressure is perfect. You're stressed about the promotion at work, that's all." I turned to face him fully, my vision blurring slightly with the movement. "David, this isn't stress. I can barely walk in a straight line some mornings. Yesterday, I had to pull over driving home because the world wouldn't stop spinning." "Maybe you should consider seeing someone," he said, reaching for his coffee mug. "A therapist, I mean. Sometimes our minds create physical symptoms when we're overwhelmed." The words hit me like a slap. This was my husband, the man who was supposed to know me better than anyone, suggesting that I was imagining months of debilitating symptoms. I watched him check his phone, already mentally at his law office, treating my pain like another minor inconvenience in his perfectly ordered world. "I'm not making this up," I whispered. "I never said you were making it up. But you have to admit, Rebecca, you've always been sensitive. Remember when you were convinced you had a heart attack last year? Turned out to be a panic attack." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar sting of tears. That panic attack had been real too, triggered by months of him dismissing my concerns about chest pains that eventually led to discovering I had developed an anxiety disorder. But somehow, in David's version of events, my anxiety invalidated every other symptom I experienced. "I need to get to work," he said, standing and straightening his tie. "Try to have a good day, okay? Maybe take a long bath tonight, drink some wine. You'll feel better." After he left, I sat alone in our perfectly decorated kitchen, surrounded by the life we'd built together. The silence was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the persistent ringing in my ear. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my recent calls to Dr. Patterson's office. 5 appointments in 3 months, each one ending with the same conclusion. Stress, anxiety, maybe hormones. But I knew my body. I'd been living in it for 38 years, and something was wrong. The headaches weren't just headaches, they were sharp, localized pains that seemed to pulse with my heartbeat. The dizziness wasn't occasional, it was constant, like being on a boat in rough seas. And the ringing in my ear had developed into something that sounded almost like whispers, just at the edge of hearing. I made a decision. Opening my laptop, I began researching neurologists in Phoenix. If everyone thought this was in my head, maybe it was time to actually look inside my head. 3 hours later, I was sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Amanda Rodriguez's neurology practice. The office was nothing like Dr. Patterson's sterile family practice. Here, the walls were painted in warm earth tones, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Other patients sat quietly, some with visible tremors, others looking as lost and desperate as I felt. "Rebecca Mitchell." A young nurse called my name, and I followed her down a hallway lined with brain scan images that both fascinated and terrified me. Dr. Rodriguez was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She listened, actually listened as I described my symptoms, taking notes and asking follow-up questions that no one else had bothered with. "How long did you say you've been experiencing the unilateral tinnitus?" she asked, referring to the ringing in my left ear. "About 4 months. It started as just occasional ringing, but now it's constant. Sometimes it sounds like, well, this might sound crazy, but sometimes it sounds like voices." Dr. Rodriguez didn't look at me like I was crazy. Instead, she made another note. "And the headaches are always on the left side?" "Yes, right here." I pointed to the area above my left temple. "They're sharp, not like regular headaches, and they get worse when I bend over or cough." "I'd like to order an MRI," she said, setting down her pen. Given your symptom profile, the unilateral headaches, the progressive nature, the auditory symptoms, I think we need to take a closer look. For the first time in months, I felt heard. Someone was taking my pain seriously, treating it as a medical mystery to be solved rather than a character flaw to be managed. Do you think something's really wrong? I asked. I think you're experiencing real symptoms that deserve real answers, she replied. Whatever we find or don't find, we're going to figure this out together. As I scheduled the MRI for the following week, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that someone finally believed me, terror about what they might discover. I drove home through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, past the perfectly manicured lawns and identical adobe-style houses, wondering how I would tell David about the appointment. That evening, as he half listened to my account of the day while reviewing case files, his response was predictably dismissive. An MRI seems excessive, he said without looking up. How much is our insurance going to cover? David, what if something's actually wrong? Then we'll deal with it. But honestly, Rebecca, I think you're going down another rabbit hole. Remember the mammogram scare 2 years ago? All that worry for nothing. I went to bed that night listening to the strange whispers in my ear, wondering if I was brave enough to face whatever truth was waiting for me in that MRI machine. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, and I felt smaller and more alone than ever, even lying next to the man who was supposed to be my partner in everything. The MRI facility in Scottsdale looked more like a spa than a medical center, with its fountain in the lobby and soft lighting designed to calm nervous patients. I'd driven there alone. David had a client meeting he couldn't reschedule, though I suspected he simply didn't want to validate my overreaction with his presence. First time having an MRI, asked Janet, the technician who greeted me. She was probably in her 50s, with short gray hair and the kind of warm smile that immediately put me at ease. Yes, and I'm honestly terrified, I admitted as she led me to a changing room. That's completely normal. The machine is loud, but I promise you'll be fine. I'll be right there the whole time, and we can talk through the intercom. After changing into a hospital gown, I followed Janet into the MRI room. The machine looked like something from a science fiction movie, a massive white tube surrounded by intimidating equipment. The narrow table where I would lie seemed impossibly small. Okay, Rebecca, I need you to lie very still, Janet explained as she positioned my head in a cage-like device. The contrast dye will help us see everything clearly. You'll feel a little cool sensation when it goes in through your fore. As the machine came to life, the sounds were indeed overwhelming, loud banging, buzzing, and humming that seemed to penetrate my bones. I closed my eyes and tried to focus on breathing, tried not to think about what they might find in the images being created of my brain. Halfway through the procedure, I noticed the sounds had stopped. Through the intercom, I heard Janet's voice, but she wasn't talking to me. Dr. Rodriguez, could you come take a look at this? My heart began to race. In all the anxiety I'd felt about the MRI, I'd somehow convinced myself that they would find nothing, that I'd be sent home with another prescription for anxiety medication and another lecture about stress management. But Janet's tone suggested otherwise. Is everything okay? I called out. Just a minute, honey. We're almost done. The machine resumed its cacophony, but now every bang and buzz seemed ominous. I could hear muffled voices in the next room, Janet and someone else, probably Dr. Rodriguez. Their conversation was too quiet to make out words, but the urgency in their tones was unmistakable. When the test finally ended and Janet helped me off the table, her demeanor had changed. She was still kind, but there was a carefulness to her movements, a professional distance that hadn't been there before. Dr. Rodriguez would like to speak with you, she said. You can get dressed first, then meet her in consultation room 3. I changed back into my clothes with shaking hands. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. The woman in the mirror looked pale and frightened, nothing like the confident marketing director I'd been just hours before. Dr. Rodriguez was waiting for me with a computer screen displaying what I assumed were images of my brain. The black and white pictures looked alien to me, all swirls and shadows that could have been anything. Rebecca, please sit down, she said gently. I want to show you what we found. She pointed to an area on the screen that looked brighter than the surrounding tissue. This is a tumor located in your left temporal lobe. It's called an acoustic neuroma, and it's pressing on your 8th cranial nerve, which explains the hearing changes and dizziness you've been experiencing. The words seemed to echo in the small room. Tumor. My brain had a tumor. Is it cancer? I managed to ask. No, acoustic neuromas are benign. They don't spread to other parts of the body. But they do grow, and left untreated, they can cause serious complications. The good news is that we caught it early enough that we have several treatment options. I stared at the image on the screen, this uninvited guest that had been living in my head, causing months of misery while everyone told me it was all in my imagination. In a twisted way, I felt vindicated. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being dramatic. There was actually something wrong. How big is it? I asked. About 2 centimeters. Large enough to cause your symptoms, but small enough that we can manage it effectively. We'll need to discuss treatment options: surgery, radiation therapy, or careful monitoring, depending on your preference and the tumor's growth rate. Dr. Rodriguez continued explaining medical details, but my mind was reeling. I thought about David dismissing my symptoms, about Dr. Patterson's rushed appointments and patronizing smile, about all the times I doubted myself because everyone else seemed so certain I was overreacting. I need to call my husband, I said suddenly. Of course. Take all the time you need. My nurse will schedule a follow-up appointment for next week, and we'll discuss your options in detail then. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before finding the courage to dial David's number. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice carrying the impatience of someone interrupted during important work. Rebecca? How did it go? Please tell me you didn't spend a fortune on unnecessary tests. David, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. They found a tumor. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. What do you mean, a tumor? In my brain. It's called an acoustic neuroma. It's benign, but it's been causing all my symptoms. The headaches, the dizziness, the ringing in my ear, everything I've been telling you about for months. Another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Jesus, Rebecca. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm coming to get you. I'm fine. I'm driving home. The doctor wants to see us both next week to discuss treatment options. Treatment options. God, I can't believe Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have taken this seriously from the beginning. The apology I'd been waiting months to hear now felt hollow. Yes, he should have listened. Yes, he should have taken me seriously. But his dismissal had been about more than just missing a medical diagnosis. It had been about not trusting me to know my own body, not respecting my experience of my own life. We'll talk when you get home, I said. I need some time to process this. I drove through Phoenix in a daze, seeing the city differently than I had that morning. The mountains in the distance looked sharper, the sky bluer. Everything felt more vivid, more precious. I had a brain tumor, but I also had an answer. After months of being gaslit by everyone around me, including myself, I finally had proof that my instincts had been right all along. When I pulled into our driveway, David's car was already there. He must have left work immediately after our call. I found him in the kitchen, pacing like a caged animal, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it. Show me, he said without preamble. Show me the pictures. I pulled out the copies Dr. Rodriguez had given me and spread them on the kitchen counter. David studied them with the same intensity he brought to legal briefs, as if he could cross-examine the tumor into submission. It looks so small, he said finally. Small enough to cause months of symptoms that everyone told me were in my head. He looked up at me then, and I saw something I rarely witnessed in my confident, successful husband. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. Rebecca, I don't know what to say. I thought I was helping, thought I was keeping you from worrying unnecessarily. I never imagined. You never imagined I might actually know what I was talking about. The accusation hung between us like a challenge. For the first time in our marriage, David had no ready response, no legal argument to deflect responsibility. He just stood there, holding pictures of a tumor that had been slowly growing in my brain while he convinced me I was being hysterical. That night, we lay in bed without touching, both of us staring at the ceiling. The ringing in my ear continued its persistent whisper, but now I knew what it was. Not voices or madness or stress, just a tumor pressing on a nerve, creating phantom sounds that had driven me to the edge of sanity. What happens now? David asked quietly. Now we figure out how to fix this, I replied. And maybe we figure out how to fix us too. The neurosurgery consultation felt like entering a different world entirely. Dr. James Morrison's office was located in the medical district downtown, in a gleaming tower that seemed to scrape the Arizona sky. Unlike Dr. Rodriguez's warm, approachable practice, this place screamed expertise and precision. The walls were lined with diplomas and awards, and the waiting room was filled with patients who looked far more serious than the typical doctor's office crowd. David had taken the day off to come with me the first time in months. He prioritized my health concerns over his work. He sat beside me, alternating between checking his phone and studying the medical pamphlets I had collected, as if he could somehow lawyer his way through brain surgery. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell? A tall, thin man in scrubs called our names. Dr. Morrison is ready for you. Dr. Morrison was exactly what I'd expected from a neurosurgeon late 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of steady hands and calm demeanor that probably came from decades of opening people's skulls. He reviewed my MRI images on a large monitor while we sat across from his desk. Acoustic neuromas are interesting tumors, he said, pointing to the bright spot that had become the center of my universe. They grow slowly, usually over years, which is why your symptoms developed gradually. Most people live with them for a long time before seeking treatment. Most people probably have husbands who believe them when they say something's wrong, I said, then immediately regretted the comment when I saw David flinch beside me. Dr. Morrison didn't react to the tension between us. Let's discuss your options. Given the size and location of your tumor, we have 3 main approaches: surgical removal, stereotactic radiosurgery, or active monitoring. He explained each option in detail. Surgery would involve opening my skull and removing the tumor entirely, but carried risks of facial nerve damage and hearing loss. Radiation therapy would use precisely targeted beams to stop the tumor's growth, but wouldn't remove it completely. Monitoring meant regular MRIs to track any changes, treating only if the tumor grew significantly. What would you recommend? David asked, his legal training kicking in as he sought expert opinion. For a 38-year-old woman with a 2-centimeter acoustic neuroma, I'd lean towards surgical removal. You're young and healthy, which means you're likely to recover well. The tumor is large enough that it will probably continue growing, and removing it now prevents future complications. The word surgery made my stomach clench. The idea of someone opening my skull, of being unconscious while a stranger held my brain in their hands, terrified me more than the tumor itself. What are the risks? I asked. With any brain surgery, there are risks of infection, bleeding, and anesthesia complications. Specific to this procedure, there's about a 10% chance of temporary facial weakness and a 5% chance of permanent hearing loss on the affected side. 5%. It sounded small until I considered that it meant 1 in 20 people like me would never hear properly again. But then again, the tumor was already affecting my hearing, and the constant ringing was driving me slowly insane. I need time to think about this, I said. Of course. This isn't a decision you need to make today. The tumor has been growing slowly for probably years. A few more weeks won't make a significant difference. On the drive home, David was unusually quiet. Phoenix traffic crawled around us in the afternoon heat, the city shimmering like a mirage beyond the windshield. You're going to do the surgery, aren't you? He said finally. I don't know. Maybe. The thought of someone cutting into my brain. But if you don't, it'll keep growing. It could get worse. I looked at him, studying his profile as he navigated the congested freeway. Since when are you encouraging me to have major surgery? 3 weeks ago, you thought all of this was psychosomatic. That was before. He paused, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Rebecca, I've been thinking a lot since your diagnosis. About how I handled everything, how I treated your concerns. I was wrong. Really, completely wrong. Yes, you were. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I know I damaged something between us, but I want to support whatever decision you make about treatment. No second-guessing, no dismissing your instincts. It was the closest thing to a real apology I'd gotten from him, but I wasn't ready to let him off the hook completely. Do you know what the worst part was? I asked. It wasn't the pain nor the dizziness. It was feeling like I was going crazy because the person who's supposed to know me best kept telling me I was imagining things. I know. I'm sorry. I thought I was protecting you from unnecessary anxiety, but I was really just protecting myself from having to deal with the possibility that something serious was wrong. His honesty surprised me. David rarely admitted to vulnerabilities, especially ones that made him look selfish or cowardly. That evening, I called my sister Lisa in Seattle. 4 years older than me, Lisa had always been my sounding board for major decisions. She listened without interruption as I explained everything: the months of symptoms, David's dismissiveness, the diagnosis, and now the impossible choice between surgery and uncertainty. "What does your gut tell you?" she asked when I finished. "That I want this thing out of my head. I want my life back." "Then you have your answer. But what if something goes wrong? What if I wake up with a paralyzed face or permanent hearing loss? What if you spend the next 5 years living in fear, getting MRIs every few months, wondering if today's headache means the tumor is growing? Rebecca, you've never been someone who chose the safe path when the right path was harder." She was right. I'd moved to Phoenix alone after college, started my career in a male-dominated industry, married David despite my parents' concerns about his workaholic tendencies. I'd always trusted my instincts and taken calculated risks. The next morning, I woke up with clarity I hadn't felt in months. The ringing in my ear seemed quieter, or maybe I was just less afraid of it now that I understood what it was. I found David in the kitchen, making coffee with the careful attention he usually reserved for legal documents. "I've decided," I said. "I want the surgery." He turned to face me, coffee mug in hand. "Are you sure?" "Yes. I want this tumor out of my head. I want to stop living in fear of what might happen and start dealing with what is happening." "Okay. When?" "I'll call Dr. Morrison today and see when he can schedule it. Probably in the next few weeks." David set down his mug and crossed the kitchen to where I stood. For the first time in months, he really looked at me like he was seeing me rather than his idea of me. "I'm scared," he admitted. "The thought of you having brain surgery. Now you're scared?" Where was this concern when I was falling apart for months? I was scared then too. That's why I kept telling you nothing was wrong. I thought if I didn't acknowledge the possibility of something serious, it wouldn't be real. I studied his face, seeing the vulnerability he usually kept so carefully hidden. "David, I can't go into this surgery worrying about your feelings. I need you to be strong, to support me without making this about your guilt or fear. I can do that. I will do that. And after this is over, we need to have some serious conversations about our marriage, about trust and respect and partnership." "I know. You're right." That afternoon, I called Dr. Morrison's office and scheduled the surgery for 3 weeks later. 3 weeks to prepare, to get my affairs in order, to say goodbye to the tumor that had controlled my life for so long. As I marked the date on our calendar, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. The tumor had been my secret tormentor, but it had also revealed truths about my marriage, my strength, and my ability to advocate for myself that I might never have discovered otherwise. In a strange way, I was almost grateful for the clarity it had brought, even as I prepared to have it cut from my brain. Surgery day arrived with the kind of perfect Arizona morning that made postcards clear blue sky, temperature in the 70s, mountains sharp against the horizon. I barely slept, but I felt surprisingly calm as David drove us to the hospital at dawn. We'd spent the previous 3 weeks in a strange, sort of suspended animation, being extra kind to each other while carefully avoiding the deeper conversations we both knew were coming. "Remember, no matter what happens today, I love you," David said as he pulled into the hospital parking garage. "I know you do," I replied. "But love isn't enough if it doesn't come with trust and respect." He nodded, accepting the truth of what I'd said without argument. The old David would have gotten defensive, would have found a way to make my criticism about my unreasonable expectations rather than his behavior. This David, the one who'd watched me be right about my own body when he'd been wrong, just held my hand as we walked into the medical center. The pre-surgical routine was surprisingly calming. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, explaining each step as they prepared me for the operation. I changed into a hospital gown, had N4 inserted, and answered the same questions about allergies and medications that multiple staff members asked for safety reasons. Dr. Morrison appeared as they were preparing to wheel me to the operating room. He looked exactly as confident and unflappable as he had during our consultation. "How are you feeling, Rebecca?" "Ready," I said, surprised to realize it was true. "I want this thing out of my head." "That's what we're going to do. I'll see you when you wake up." The anesthesiologist explained that I'd feel drowsy in a few seconds, and then nothing. No dreams, no sense of time passing, just a complete blank until I gradually became aware of voices around me. "Rebecca, can you open your eyes for me?" The recovery room was bright and filled with the steady beeping of monitors. My head felt heavy and strange, wrapped in what seemed like an enormous bandage. A nurse was checking my pupils with a small flashlight. "How do you feel? Any nausea?" I took mental inventory of my body. My head hurt, but it was a different kind of pain than the tumor had caused, sharper but somehow cleaner. The constant ringing in my left ear was gone, replaced by a strange silence that felt almost foreign. "The ringing stopped," I said, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube. "That's wonderful news. Dr. Morrison will be in to see you shortly, but I can tell you that the surgery went very well. He was able to remove the entire tumor." David appeared at my bedside, looking like he'd aged years in the few hours I'd been unconscious. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. "Hey," he said softly, "how's my brave wife?" "Tired, but okay, I think." "Is it really gone?" "Dr. Morrison said he got all of it. Complete removal, no complications." Over the next few hours, as the anesthesia wore off and I became more alert, Dr. Morrison visited to explain how the surgery had gone. The tumor had been larger than anticipated, closer to 3 centimeters than 2, and had been growing for probably 5 to 7 years. My symptoms had been caused by its pressure on multiple nerves and brain structures. "You made the right choice with surgery," he said. "This tumor would have continued growing and causing increasingly severe symptoms. Your hearing should return to normal, and the dizziness and headaches should resolve completely." I spent 2 days in the hospital, surrounded by flowers from friends and colleagues who'd had no idea I was struggling with anything more serious than work stress. My sister Lisa flew in from Seattle, and my parents drove down from Flagstaff. Everyone kept saying how brave I was, but I didn't feel brave. I felt like I'd simply done what needed to be done. The real test came during recovery at home. For the first week, I was dizzy and nauseous from the trauma of surgery, sleeping most of the day and moving carefully when I was awake. David took time off work, something that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier, and transformed into an attentive caregiver. He managed my medications, helped me shower with my surgical site protected, and dealt with insurance companies and medical bills without complaint. But more importantly, he listened. When I described how the silence in my left ear felt strange after months of ringing, he didn't minimize or try to fix it. He just acknowledged my experience. When I worried about returning to work or whether the tumor might grow back, he researched acoustic neuromas obsessively and shared what he learned without lecturing me about what I should or shouldn't worry about. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me one evening about 2 weeks after surgery. We were sitting on our back patio, watching the sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and purple. "About trust and respect in our marriage. And I think I stopped seeing you as a separate person with your own experiences and instincts. Somewhere along the way, you became an extension of me, and when your experiences didn't match what I thought they should be, I dismissed them instead of listening." It was the most insightful thing he'd said about our relationship in years, maybe ever. "Why do you think that happened?" "Honestly, I think it made me feel more in control. If I could explain away your symptoms, your anxiety, your concerns, then I didn't have to face the possibility that life might throw us something I couldn't handle." I studied his profile in the fading light. "And now I know that trying to control everything just meant I almost missed something really important. If you hadn't pushed for that MRI, if you hadn't trusted your own instincts despite everyone telling you not to." He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. The tumor could have grown for years more, pressing on vital structures, potentially causing permanent damage or worse. My recovery took months, but it was miraculous to experience my symptoms disappearing one by one. The headaches faded first, then the dizziness. My hearing returned gradually, and the phantom ringing never came back. By Christmas, 3 months after surgery, I felt better than I had in years. David and I started couples therapy in January. It was a suggestion, which surprised me. In our sessions, we unpacked years of communication patterns that had led to my health crisis becoming a relationship crisis. I learned to be more direct about my needs instead of hoping he would intuitively understand them. He learned to listen without immediately trying to solve or dismiss my concerns. Marriage isn't about agreeing on everything, our therapist, Dr. Williams, explained during one session. It's about trusting your partner's experience of their own life, even when it's different from yours. The brain tumor had been an unwelcome invader, but in fighting it, I discovered strengths I didn't know I had. I'd learned to advocate for myself, to trust my instincts even when everyone around me suggested I was wrong, and to demand the respect I deserved from the people who claimed to love me. 6 months after surgery, at my follow-up MRI, the images showed no sign of tumor recurrence. The strange, bright spot that had dominated my brain scans was gone, leaving behind only healthy tissue and the small changes from surgery that Dr. Morrison said would fade with time. "How do you feel?" Dr. Rodriguez asked during that appointment. "Like myself again," I said. "Actually, like a stronger version of myself." David and I had a long way to go in rebuilding our marriage, but we were both committed to doing the work. He'd learned that loving someone meant believing them about their own experiences, and I'd learned that I deserved nothing less than that kind of respect and trust. The tumor had whispered lies in my ear for months, but in the end, it had taught me to listen to a more important voice, my own. And for the first time in years, that voice was clear, confident, and finally being heard.